Kim, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to learning more about you and your work.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, I'm now thinking back. I think during COVID time, I was like an avid listener of your podcast. So it's like nice to actually now be in it.
I love it. I know it's crazy thinking back to like the COVID time where it feels like yesterday, but it also feels like a million years ago where we were like looking for community and spaces, So full
Definitely.
circle, right? Now
Full
we are
circle.
here.
Yeah.
Um, I was telling Kim before we jumped on to this interview that it was such a delight to see her work in our studio visit artists. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, I have to do this interview. Like, I just thought your work was really invigorating and it invited questions. So I'm just really excited to learn more about what you're creating and what you're doing in the studio and outside of the studio. All right. So to start off, I always really like getting an idea of the artists themselves. So you and where you first kind of dove into art and became inspired by it and wanted to make it.
Yeah, it's always hard. I feel like every artist has like a beginning and oftentimes you don't really remember it. So I think for me, I would say, I think the moment where I was like, I'm going to be an artist was in this like I took this community college class. It was sculpture, and I took a bunch of those classes. Had no idea what I was going to do. I thought that I was going to be a hairdresser, and that definitely was not it. And then like this teacher really inspired me to do kind of build whatever. And so I built this residency, this portable artist residency on the community campus. And I was it was kind of this like negotiation of like I need a studio space, and I'm a student artist, but I want to invite other artists to have a conversation with. And so I ran that, and I was like, okay, I'm an artist from then on. Um, and then I just went to transfer and then got a MFA, and now I'm in LA.
Oh, okay. I want to hear more about this portable artist space just really quickly because that is an incredible jump in some ways. You know what I mean? Like you were like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be a sculptor. Oh wait, I have this highly conceptual idea that feeds your practice and helps others. Like that is so cool. And I feel like in some ways, and we'll get into this later, there's still a thread of that in what you
Yeah.
do with the after hours gallery or the cold read room. Do you feel like this has just always been part of you, like creating these spaces for others?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I would think that there was, there's obviously, I always like to say that I have to work in both because they kind of fuel each other. So, for my own individual practice, it's like me processing a lot of like these social interactions or these kind of lived experiences that happen through collaborating with a community, creating like a family, like those families, like the art family, and all of these like social dynamics that happen. So I always feel like there's a push for these things of grabbing everyone together because it's such an inspiring environment to kind of like grow as artists together. But in terms of that piece, that first origin piece, it was just, I think it was, I was really excited and inspired by the community, and obviously community college, the word community is in it. So that environment felt very inspiring. And I needed to, so the prompt was like, Kim, you have to make a structure that's really sound, like that won't fall apart. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll just make so I made a 4 by 8 foot, and then by 10 foot tall, like structure. And I did it with another artist. So I collaborated with this artist named Kevin Cow. And we were like, we're gonna just run this residency. First, we'll like make sure we can plug it in, and we need to have like a loft where you can take naps. And this is going to be like our office space. And it was just kind of this thing that generated conversation. At the time, the college, I mean, the art department was so supportive, but there was like no space. Like there was no space for students to make work. There was no site for us to kind of have this like area to congregate. And so that's what it ended up being. So we ran it like a residency for 3 weeks, I think, and we invited artists and writers from the greater community. So at that time, I was in San Diego, and so I invited like a writer from San Diego to stay for like the week, and we just hosted events, and they would like talk about their work and talk around with the students. In some ways, it was also like a visiting artist like series, a hub, but people had to like apply for it. We had like this application process, and then it was portable, so we were able to unscrew the walls and the roof, and then we took it to like around to another area. We got invited for this art fair, which was really interesting, a different configuration, and now it rests in peace in my parents' backyard.
I love it. The final resting place. Maybe it'll come back at some point. Who knows? It'll be resurrected.
Probably with a bunch of spiders.
Right, right. Oh, I know. Um, so I'm interested. You have this incredible experience. You decide, okay, I'm gonna go for this. You end up getting your MFA, and you come out of your MFA, and you're now in LA. And I'm looking at your work, and again, it's really incredible. You seem to work very seamlessly between different mediums. Like I'm looking at paintings, then you have sculptures, then you have what looks like they may be ceramic pieces or something that is even like a vessel to installation. And I think what really strikes me about your work is sometimes I see people that are working across this, but there's not a fluidity. Like your paintings stand on their own, yet also are able to sit in this larger context. And that can be really difficult to do. So is that the kind of work that you were making when you came out of your MFA program, or can you take us back to that time and tell us a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, mostly I was working in this expanded field when I was getting out of my MFA, but I did had to have instead of drawings and paintings, I was doing video. So I was making video works, but they operated like paintings because they were just like color shifted and vibrant. But I always wanted this conversation between a two-dimensional thing that is on the wall, as like this kind of my work is very abstract. So I wanted this kind of like narrative or tempo for how people would walk through the exhibition or see the sculptures. So there's always like a two-dimensional element, but I think because it started getting, colorful, it felt like maybe it didn't need to move anymore. Also, technology kind of is difficult. So with working with projections, not that video would never come back. It's just like reintroducing it in a way that makes sense with my work. I'm waiting for that moment to click.
Great. Um, I like what you were saying about this idea of narrative or tempo that you have in your work. Because I know, having read about your work and learning about it, that you explore these stories that are passed down from your mother, like this idea of oral narrative. And
Mhm.
I thought it was interesting because when you were talking about this art piece, from when you were first beginning into your art career, you'd mentioned like community and art made families, like you used the word family in that to describe it. And then I was like instantly went to your work, and thinking about how there is you address families and like lineage and heritage. So can you talk a little bit more about that in your work?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of well, I guess, all right. So when I was making work, I was dealing really directly with my like intimate relationships in my community. So the works were, I think my graduating thesis show was like about like failed artist collaborations. And so so it was about,
That is so cool though. Like it's very interesting and needed research. And yeah, anyway.
totally. So it was just like, it's like how do you relate, how do you try like talk about feelings and ideas and dreams without being like misunderstood, or this kind of like how do you communicate effectively, and we all come from different cultures, so there's a way that we were like almost ingrained to communicate, and how do you work together, and I realized, after that series of failed collaborations, I realized it was all kind of thinking about making a family or making a community. And so for me, that's like super important to feel like you're not this like alone, you get raised to think that there's this one major artist and they leave everything behind. And that's like, I don't think that I want to subscribe to that like mythic narrative. And it's just like, no, we can share, we can be, if we're together and we're inspiring each other, we're just gonna raise all together. Like there's that quote, all boats rise with the tide, and I really believe in that. So in that way, there's like, there will be complications in those like friend relationships, in the same way family relationships will be like too. And so I think it was a natural progression for me when I realized, oh, maybe I'm like, okay, I'm making these art families and these communities, and I'm like world building within the location I am in. That probably stems a lot with how I think about my family, and kind of understand and kind of shifting to understanding that a little bit more. Um, yeah, so my work is always, it's either from my own lived experience of telling the story about this community, or now it's like right now I just finished that series with my mother, so it was about getting to know her through the storytelling that she was letting me know about our ancestors, that then also morphed into her childhood story, um and so forth. And the storytelling is so interesting to me because it has like a past, and then it also has a present, because it gets like change, the storytelling always changes depending on what state of mind that storyteller is. And I'm interested in that because it just keeps on changing in really interesting ways.
I love that because it's so true. We have this idea sometimes like, oh, there's this narrative, there's a story, I read it in a book, and therefore it becomes concrete and unchanging. But rather, if you were to talk to that person again, it's going to shift. Maybe something that has happened from that point on causes them to look back and have a different vantage point. And I think that's really beautiful. And I feel like that speaks to your work in terms of how I see these installations like talking to each other, and potentially like being shown in different spaces, the way that the pieces are going to relate to one another. So I would love to like dive into your studio practice and how that work is being generated. So can you take us into like a day in the studio with you and what that kind of looks like?
Yeah, so a day in the studio, so I think that changes too. Like, I might have a different pattern a year before. So this year's pattern is going in early. I tried to make my studio a little cozy, so I feel like it's homey. So I have a coffee, and then I kind of journal. And the journaling is to gather my thoughts and then maybe set intentions in the studio. Because if I don't have a list, then I'll probably forget and get distracted.
Me too. I'm right there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am working right now on two different series. So often sometimes that'll happen. And like when I was working with my mother's series, I had an overlap collaboration with Amy McKay, who's my studio mate. So I often overlap series. And they kind of like, and I think that my hunch is that it might be what makes the flow of it so easy, because they're kind of being worked on at the same time, but one has a bigger emphasis, and then I swap to the next one and have a bigger emphasis. But so right now I'm working on a series with my dad, and then a series which is so that one I'm just like problem solving all of these weird math equations in my head, which is totally not my forte. But so that's a little, when I need a break from that, I go to do my series about these, right now their nickname is Magic Shoes. So it's about these intimate dance parties that I threw with my friends in COVID time. And also before we had these very, but then it got even smaller in COVID time. And so that's kind of and they kind of relate to each other in the way that my dad's content is a little bit more harder to deal with in terms of like, because he's dealing with, the series is like centering on his reignite his like diagnosis of like dementia, and then he had short-term memory loss since 2005. So we're using the story of his near-death experience as this way of traversing his memories. And so I'm kind of like archiving his memories through that storytelling, which is a story that is something that he really gets excited by, and it kind of regrounds him when he gets confused. So when that kind of that topic is super, when it feels very like I guess deep, then I move over to the other as like kind of a healing release from it. And so, which that series actually functioned that way. Like the dance parties were for this type of release and healing through it.
Hmm. I have to say, hearing you talk about your work and the different areas that you are leaning into, I find it really incredible how self-aware you seem in this process. You know, narratives with families can be very complicated. And there can be great moments and there can be some really not great moments, where things may have occurred that we didn't know about or did, etc. And then adding in, what's happening with your dad, that adds another layer of emotional vulnerability potentially, so this fact that you have the magic shoes piece to balance it out, like feels really, again, self-aware. um do you feel like the journaling and part of that helps with it, or is it just you're kind of going through all of this together? Is there anything you could share on that front?
Yeah, I think the journaling definitely helps. I think it like gathers the thoughts, and it's a way of yeah, because the family stories really do have an emotional toll. So there is like a processing that has to occur, and when it gets too uh feels too weighty or something, I have to shift to kind of balance myself out.
Mhm.
And then that is through thinking about that this is like, so yeah, I would say that when I'm working on like my work, sometimes it operates from a type of longing, or like I like to think of it as like it's a unresolved issue that I'm trying to address, and sometimes it's harder than others. And but for me, it's not that I'm trying to resolve the issue. That's just like the pull to the topic. But it's more trying to like unpack it and understand it a little bit more, and get and see what it feels like to be outside of my body and into the space.
Hmm. I love what you said there. It's not about resolving it, because like you were saying earlier with the narratives, like there's always going to be this shifting part of it, which I also start to see in your work. I'm looking at your work as you're talking about all of this. And there is like feels like there's a bit of movement in the pieces.
Mhm.
And I was hoping you could speak a bit about the palette and like color choices with dealing with weighty topics, and kind of how you navigate that as an artist.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. So, the palettes, I think they got more complicated when I started my like to draw more and paint more. So like in my previous, like my earlier work, like right out of grad school, the colors were more simple. And they were like kind of domestic colors, almost like candy or something. And at that time I think I was more so thinking about this as like it was my first time I was introducing this idea of fiction in storytelling. So the flamboyant colors or the vibrant colors were, you know, pulling from that kind of whimsical world. Um, as it got further, as it got more complicated, I started thinking about two sides because a lot of the sculptures start turning flat for the most part. And I was thinking about how these two colors could be in opposition to each other, or they could become a totally different color or like image from, you know, the other side. And so usually when I gravitate to color, I'm thinking about what's the tone or the atmosphere I want the work to kind of emit. A lot of the movement, like when I'm making a sculpture, I often think of it as kind of this, it's like a choreography of dance in some ways. Like rather than, you know, I'm dealing with the content in a storytelling mode, but the works to me are like almost like emitting the story through a gesture, or like holding a pose. So um earlier I was using color as a way to accentuate like a strain or like a wound or something in the form. And then either, and you know, because fiction is, there's like, you know, when the story starts to deviate a little bit or get exaggerated, I often use like brighter colors to kind of reference that. um yeah. And then the last piece, the last series with my mother that I just had a show last year, I was really trying to harness this idea of this peacock. So I was thinking a lot about the peacock and the phoenix. And so like the phoenix is this mythic creature, and but they always say that the peacock is a land phoenix. So there's kind of like they share like physical attributes. And so I liked thinking about those color palettes as kind of a reference to the story of like it having these like mythic parts, but also it being grounded in reality. And then there's also this like weird, I don't, in LA, there's an area in LA that has these peacocks. They're kind of like the pigeons of that suburban neighborhood. And it's because like someone had collected a peacock and then they you know, multiplied. And so I like thinking of them of this immigrant like family of peacocks, and thinking about their like relocation from their original habitat to America and California and Los Angeles. So I like that as a little bit of a kind of side tangent to that story.
I love that. I love that. Uh, this idea of these peacocks that are now existing as a family here, and they're like, how did we get into the suburb of LA? Well, we're going to tell our story, you know. And also, I'd never heard the peacock being a land phoenix, and I love that, like that, in this idea of grounding it in this, you know, realistic bird with this other idea, and then and how that relates to our own stories, because we always have our own mythical or this I don't know, this idea of what our childhood was like, or our parents are telling us something and it's not true. They think it's true, but it's not exactly based in it. So the way you're weaving this all together, I just find it really interesting, and it makes sense in terms of how you have to work in different, you know, mediums to bring this all together and to fruition. It's just really, really gorgeous. I keep looking too at this sculpture that you have that has like this kind of neon green, and it's almost looks like pipes, or like it becomes these like different like a structure that lines that's occurring,
Mhm.
and how that plays in the space. And so that's from your last series with your mom, I think. Could you share just a little bit about that piece?
Yeah, is it like a long piece, neon green?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
like
that piece,
yeah, a lot of connections. Mhm.
got it. Yeah, that piece is called Remedies. And it's kind of like I was thinking a lot about this plant because our ancestors are in the plants in the forest in the Philippines. And so I was thinking about this kind of growth or this like fence that could be almost like, if we were a plant, our family would, we could continue growing off that same, origin point. And so I was also thinking about it as kind of inherited remedies. And so on the little shelves of the plants, so it's basically the leaf is resin encased with peacock feathers. And so I was thinking about the leaves as this kind of like filter of ways of seeing through, and so the remedies were like there's hands that are connected to each other, and so I thought of that as like a kind of amulet. They're connected by necklace chains, and then I was thinking about that as information being passed down from one person to another, so like my mother to me. And then there's this like sake bottle. And so thinking about this like potion, there's like this remedy that's like in the Philippines, that's this green bottle. It's not the sake bottle. The sake bottle is my addition to a remedy. But yeah, just thinking about inherited remedies. And so the whole structure itself is made with medical casting tape. So it's like a bandage. So the idea was that it would wrap around these kind of thorns. So in small areas, you'd see these little thorns that get like a little bit pink or like kind of an orangey color on the edge. So I wanted it to feel like it was repairing each other.
Mm. I just love how you bring materials in. And like, again, I just keep going back and saying seamless because I think sometimes, you'll see a work and the pieces just don't totally come together in a way where it transcends what it's made of. But there's like such a great conversation between like the bandages. I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And like this, it's causing me to think even on my own family of inherited remedies, like the things
Mhm.
that we've been taught to treat, grief or to treat
Yeah.
hard time, and I just think it's really beautiful how you do that. And then adding this color in there. Yeah, just fantastic. Sorry, I'm
Thank
just
you.
and I love that they're very specific to,
Mhm.
you and your family, yet they can really transcend and cause people to think like, oh wow, what is my remedy or family's remedy or etc. Oh, so good. uh, well, thank you, Kim, for sharing about your work. And I could talk to you about it honestly for hours. But I'm going to transition to a couple other things that you do in
Mhm.
terms of community building. And I
Yeah.
thought we could start with the cold read. Can you tell us a little bit about the cold read and what it is?
Yeah, so the cold read, I started it in 2008. Oh, sorry, not 2000, 2018. Um,
I know time, it's
and
one of those things right now,
yeah,
right?
time, yeah. Where's time? But I started it right after grad school, and I was like, itching to continue a dialogue. And I was like, I think when you get out of grad school or about to get out of grad school, you're like, is my community real or did it only exist in grad school? And so I was like, I'm just gonna make sure that it exists outside of grad school. And so it's like, okay, everyone, I took this quiz on, it was like on the Creative Independent, which is this like blog site. And it was like a really great check-in quiz about like what you wanted to accomplish for the next year, or like, were you doing what you wanted to do? And it made me realize like, I'm not doing what I want to do. I want to like make community. And so I wrote this letter to everyone, this very casual letter. And I think it was like, hey babes, do you guys want to get together and like do this email form? And they were like, yes, I'm excited. And so I made it as a way of having a low commitment way of talking about each other's works, because we were so busy trying to figure out how to live as an artist. And so the idea was that was an email based. So it was always online from the beginning. And I would just put this like MailChimp together, and each artist had 3 slots. And so I told them, I was like, okay, you can either show an image, you can present a text, or you could do a video, and you have 3 slots to do that. And then we will write a letter to you. And so the idea was to think about um, the work for an extended period. So like a week and a half, we would think about this letter and write the letter to the artist. And then they would have this generous feedback of like, 1 to 2 pages of writing. And we have this all archived. And we invited like, other artists because I wanted it to be this bigger community outside of visual arts. So we had like musicians come and then poets, but the only ones that really stick around are the visual artists. Um, so it was good. So we've done it for since then, and it's kind of morphed. So we still do the critique as the base core, and then we do prompt-based exhibitions. So the idea was like, rather than waiting for a curator to curate us to an exhibition based on the theme, we would ask a question to the group and see who is interested in thinking about that question together. And we thought of it more as a visual dialogue that we would come with our individual practices, trying to generate an interesting conversation together. So that's where that kind of idea had come from. And now we're shifting because all of us are teaching and we got tired of writing letters to each other. So we're giving ourselves a break. And now we're doing critiques where we are talking about our work instead, and we're critiquing the artist talk. So,
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that.
yeah.
And I think what you were doing is so smart. I remember when I was getting out of graduate school, I spoke to somebody who was about 10 years ahead of me. And, people in my MFA, we were getting ready to start applying to jobs. But of course, this was like 2008 and there were no jobs because of the financial crisis. Anyway, other story.
Mhm.
Um, but but they mentioned that they would do this. They would critique each other. They stayed in contact. They had these conversations. They critiqued the writing, the artist statement, what you're doing. And it really allowed them to move forward in terms of getting jobs and building a network in a very smart way where they supported each other. Whereas there's other MFA programs, where they just kind of disband and there's not this camaraderie, and you've spent so much time together learning
Yeah.
each other's work, strengths, weaknesses, for better or worse, and it just seems like that was such a smart move coming out of there, but also just in terms of supporting others, and growing yourself, very, very cool. It also kind of reminds me of this band, like it's from like early 2000s, the Postal Service, and about how they would
Yeah, I
send.
know the Postal Service. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For those of you guys listening that don't know the Postal Service, you should go listen to them. They're really great. But they would, I think, record and then send it in the mail, right? And then,
Yes, totally.
yeah,
That's where the name came from, that they would send it through the Postal Service.
very cool. I love it. Um, so you're also started the After Hours Gallery. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So After Hours Gallery, 2020 was really hard. And I think a lot of us, everyone had a hard time in so many different levels. And I think part of it also was this kind of stagnation of like what to do, and is the art world different now, and how do you navigate, and what are the new structures you want to move forward with. And so me and my studio mate, who named Amy McKay, we've been studio mates since grad school. So we've been almost been a decade of sharing our spaces together. And we started a lot of projects. Some of them are kind of on hiatus, but this project, After Hours, is one of the like projects that has been kind of solid. And essentially we were like, we have this weird space in our studio. It was like made because the person who had our studio prior needed a resin room to like protect his paintings. And so it was a perfect gallery space. And so essentially we had this idea that like, okay, so the name's going to be After Hours because we have our day jobs, and the site of like creative production happens at night after hours. And we're like, okay, so there's two of us. It would be great to have the artist, like we invite one artist, and that artist invites either an art crush, someone who they've wanted to collaborate with for a while, like their friend or something, or an art nemesis, but no one has done art nemesis. So I was hoping that that would happen. Um, yeah, but so yeah, so generally we invite one artist, they invite someone, and it's someone they might not know well yet, and they their acquaintance, and it's a way of like bringing the communities together, and they're forcing a collaboration within the space. So if you've noticed on After Hours like Instagram profile, none of the spaces are white, and we wanted it to be like one of the directions are like you can't have a white cube, like we're like anti-white cube, you have to change the space. So you have to transform the space into something because it's such an intimate space that you're forging a dialogue or collaborate. There's like you can make separate work, but it's going to be in this kind of close proximity to one another. So really lean into it. And so they did. All of them really leaned into transforming the space and making it their own kind of like artist discovery or experimental space, like something that they might have not done. So it's been really exciting.
I love it. I keep picturing the art nemesis. I like so want that to happen too.
I know, I want that. I'm just like, come on, guys. I know you guys have an art nemesis. Like, bring them on.
There's like an art battle or something. I don't even know. Like it would be so great. Um, oh man. This has been such a pleasure and you've really offered, I think, a lot of advice to listeners that are in different, parts of their career, just like by example, in terms of sharing what you've done and you've created opportunities for yourself and for others, and you've created learning opportunities for yourself and for others. I was just wondering if there's any other advice that you would like to share with people listening today.
I, you know, I would say, like, I mean, there's two advices, I guess. One advice is that I think that community can be a strength and can be a source of inspiration. And even if there's like, if you can lean into that more, I think you can create an environment where everyone can succeed. We don't need just like one superstar, it's like that won't fuel you when you're like, I don't know, like 90, hopefully 90 and continuing to make. You want to make sure that you have those relationships that you really trust and, can be supportive and grow together. And then another one I would say is that I've been saying this a lot lately, and because my practice is very abstract in nature, and I think that often I've heard recently from my students is like they hear that in being intuitive is lazy, and I told them no, I think that's like following your intuition or being intuitive is a tool, and you can totally lean on it because the intuition is just this kind of it's everything that is from how you grew up, how you're raised, your environment. It's all these like ingrained decision making that's like totally almost like synchronized with your body. And so it's up to you to kind of unpack that to find where that comes from. And often when I'm making work, I am like following this like almost nonverbal like pull or force. And then I do the work to kind of unpack it. And so there's almost no way of having an unbiased opinion because we carry all of our decisions carry histories. So
I think that is so interesting to hear, because the student saying, intuition is lazy. I had this conversation much earlier on when I was doing the podcast with an amazing artist who, um, we had this conversation about intuition and how it had been like weaponized almost in art criticism, mainly against women,
yeah, totally.
And so I think it's interesting that it's still like I agree with you in terms of like intuition, I actually think is key to, in a lot of ways and making art. It's like trusting that voice and unpacking it, like you said, and understanding where things come from. Is it your, training? Is it your, background personally through your lived experience, visual things that you saw as a kid, or etc. But yeah, that it's still kind of being weaponized in a way against, and who do we think of as intuitive? Again, women.
Yeah.
Um, so I just think that's really interesting. And I love how you worded it in terms of like unpacking it and that you have to do the work. It's not just relying on like, oh, I'm going to do whatever I want, but rather like understanding where things come from. I think that is incredibly interesting. And yes, the community is building relationships is so important. Um, this has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Good. I love learning about your work, Kim. And before we jump off of here, can you just share with listeners where they can find you online?
Yeah, so I have a website which is kimgarcia.info. And then if you want to see more recent up-to-date stuff, it's on my Instagram. I haven't changed my Instagram handle since I made an Instagram. So it's Kim Wants Coffee. Very easy to remember.
I personally love the handle because every time I read it, I'm like, yes, that sounds like a wonderful idea right All right. So, everybody, we will be sharing all of these links in the show notes so you can easily find Kim's website or her Instagram just by heading over there to the show notes. And of course, we will be sharing the work that we were discussing here in the interview over on the Instagram at I Like Your Work Podcast. And you can also find it over on the website at iLikeYourWorkPodcast.com. So, Kim, thank you again for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.